So thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here at the symposium. However, in being invited here by Jim Mann, he did know exactly what he was doing, and he asked me to speak on a topic that I'm extremely uncomfortable going into. It's a challenging topic. And in responding to Jim's challenge, I am going to rove over some wild terrain. This is a story of where and how we undertake transdisciplinary engagements around farming and food. It's about intellectual maps and unexplored disciplinary terrain. It's about uncomfortable gaps in our scholarship. And it's about the single compelling reason why we need to start forming new disciplinary connections and doing so urgently. So first, a bit of introduction to my own academic world. I am what is fuzzily described as an agri-food scholar. That is, someone who thinks that the most important insights about agriculture and food can't be found inside specific disciplinary silos, but can often be found by looking across disciplines and fields of interest. We sometimes describe ourselves as studying foods from paddock to plate. Here is a typical example of paddock to plate thinking. With nice photos that take you from an Australian farm through the marketplace and then on to consumption. However, when you try to map that onto a diagram of orthodox sites of disciplinary scholarship, you get this. This is as my colleague Claire Lemine in France described it. What she did here in this particular diagram is she mapped out all the terrain that might come into agri-food studies, and you end up with a very complex world of interactions. I'll admit that in Australasia and around much of the world outside Europe, we've tended to cluster on the left-hand side. If I get my cursor up there, we've tended to cluster on this side of the diagram. However, this side of the diagram, the one that Jim challenged me to talk on, is much scarier terrain for an agri-food scholar. In his wisdom, Jim's deliberately asked me to go out of my comfort zone on the left here and move over onto the right and try and make disciplinary connections between environment and health as understood through food systems. And doing that in 30 minutes is going to be a bit of a wild ride into the unknown, so I'll try and make this more simple by turning Claire Lemine's lovely complex diagram into three much more simple metaphorical maps. So those three maps, think of them as mind maps, although there will be visual aids at times. Those three maps are these three journeys here. These maps take us on three journeys of cross-disciplinary engagement in agri-food studies. The first is the journey which links changing farming systems to changing diets and an escalating nutritional crisis. The second map takes us from links changing farming worlds to wider environmental dynamics, including the quest for greater environmental sustainability. And both these maps, that's the journey from farming to nutrition and the journey from farming to environmental harms or outcomes, is territory that my agri-food colleagues and I are very comfortable roaming around on. The other map is the road less travelled, and I'm going to just get there in due course, eventually. But I'll deal with the two much more comfortable maps first. Here's number one, the map that takes you from farming system change to dietary crisis. So on the first map, there's much to be learned from connecting the world of farming with the world of food and nutrition. Scholars in my field have provided compelling accounts of how massive changes in the way we farm in the 20th century, industrialising, intensifying, focusing more and more technical expertise on a narrowing group of animal and plant species, reconstituted through the marvels of food science and engineered into a range of processed, sweetened, flavour-enhanced, marketed, branded and increasingly fast food products, has not been good for our collective health. So from books like Raj Patel's Stuffed and Starved to the work of my friends like Jane Dixon on the obesogenic environment, through to more popular books like Gary Taub's bestseller, The Case Against Sugar, there's a large body of scholarly work that links agricultural change to nutritional calamity. There's a direct relationship between humans developing industrial agricultural systems designed to produce large volumes of increasingly cheap basic commodities like sugar, wheat, oilseeds or meat, and the parallel emergence of a food industry that has been designing ways to encourage us to consume increasingly damaging volumes of such products. Credit here to the pop artist Henry Hargraves, who created a wonderful exhibition where he created birthday cakes for every child whose name was rejected by the Department of Internal Affairs in New Zealand. Worse still, agri-food scholars are pretty well universally agreed that these are systemic relations. They're locked and loaded at multiple levels of complex agri-food worlds that simply can't be wished away through better designed education campaigns or better informed consumers at the point of purchase. So that's the first map across which I roam, linking agri-food systems change to dietary and nutritional disaster. And for New Zealand, that is an important map. The second map links agriculture to environment. It links farming to ecologies, and it links us to the pursuit of greater sustainability. So, the emergence of highly technical, modernist and mechanistic approaches to farming in the mid-20th century was initially embraced as a miracle of modern science and a solution to vexing ills like persisting world hunger. All the agricultural scientists I worked with during my early university education and career had to some extent drunk from this fountain of optimism. Yet, ever since Rachel Carson published Silent Spring in 1962, detailing the baleful ecological impacts of the new wonder pesticide DDT, there's been an increasing fracture of scientific worlds between those who want to double down on modernist, mechanistic, technical approaches to the science of agriculture, and those who argue that such worlds of scholarship have a dire track record of abstracting farming systems out of their wider ecological and social worlds. The map linking the way we farm to various outcomes in terms of ecologies and environmental impacts and the challenge of sustainability is now well traversed. As far back as 2004, if we look at this slide, Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Dr. Morgan Williams, in an eerily prophetic assessment of where the dairy industry was about to take us in terms of environmental impacts, talked of a time bomb that was primed to go off in rural-urban relations as the environmental impacts of dairy intensification became increasingly repugnant to a wider citizenry. Remember, writing in 2004. This excellent 2007 review of the Canterbury water crisis in New Zealand Geographic itemised how that time bomb is now starting to explode. Now, these two maps are well known and recognised in an increasing body of 21st century scholarship. The linkage between modernist farming and dietary and nutritional crisis on one side, and the links between modernist agriculture and environmental crisis on the other, are now the subject of important transdisciplinary dialogue. But Jim Mann already knew this and specifically demanded that I talk about the third map, the third side of the triangle, a map which is so relatively unexplored that it might as well be signalled, "Here be dragons." It's a map linking diet and nutrition to ecological effects. It's a map that for New Zealand travels around the world and back again. There are a few explorers already out on this map. Our friend Tim Lang came to New Zealand a while back and described how the turn away from red meat towards white meat in the 70s and 80s had had devastating consequences for the sustainability of the North Sea fishery, as demand for fish soared. And so dietary change in pursuit of better nutritional and health outcomes had driven negative ecological change. Or this morning's article in The Guardian on superbug hotspots in parts of the world where antibiotic abuse and intensive livestock farming is creating regions where public health is now threatened by superbugs. Or perhaps more positively, how dietary choices might positively engage with sustainability concerns. For instance, there's been a recent upsurge of interest in how we might encourage developed world consumers to add insects into their diet, Not for any kind of aesthetic reasons, obviously, but simply because they're an ecologically vastly more efficient source of protein than our current styles of farming. So, enough excuses. I'm going to go there. I need to walk onto this map. To do this, I'm going to briefly consider two pathways that stretch out into this relatively unknown academic terrain. One running from diet and nutrition to sustainable environments via food products. So one map goes via food products, and the other pathway that runs from farms to the public health of citizens via farmed environments. So food products on one side, farmed environments on the other. Those are the two ways that I see that can take us out into this strangely unknown terrain. So the first pathway, linking diet and nutrition, running from farmed environments to consumers via food products, was the subject of my own work some years ago on the emergence and outcomes of having certified and branded products on the shelves of mainstream retailers. Through things like certified organic or free-range labelling, the link between consumer choice and potentially positive environmental outcomes clearly does exist now. While these are now nearly ubiquitous, it's important to remember that such labels were almost non-existent in New Zealand prior to 1998, the year in which the label on the top left of this slide first appeared. That was 1998, comparatively recently. By choosing to buy a Zespri branded kiwi fruit at New World, you are now buying a product that is third-party audited to follow the Zespri system, as you can see on this particular slide, which gives attention not only to the taste and visual qualities of the fruit, it also inspects and certifies to nearly 200 criteria relating to environmental performance, food safety, and the like. So, consumer choices to buy safe and tasty kiwi fruit are aligned through this kind of audit system to also provide environmental benefits. But it isn't a simple relationship. I usually use the Zespri system as an exemplar of New Zealand's most comprehensive environmental quality and food safety audit. It's the branding device and infrastructure that has been enormously successful. It explains why New Zealand produces around 30% of the world's kiwi fruit, but secures over 60% of the global revenue earned by kiwi fruit as a product category. Yet, we are also in the midst of great travails for the kiwi fruit industry, when it was discovered just last year that some of the labour contracting organisations that had been ticking the right boxes for worker welfare on their Zespri system audits had been exploiting foreign labour to the extent that their very worst practices would probably be described as slavery. This is the trade-off that surrounds the use of audit systems, the use of brands and labels that link consumer choices in a supermarket to enhanced environmental or social sustainability on a farm and orchard, potentially a long way away. The relationship is helpful, but not perfect. And where it is imperfect, the imperfections can really hurt you. But in all my years publishing on the subject of certified organic systems or integrated pest management or regenerative agriculture strategies or the many other ways that are now available for producers to demarcate the environmental performance of their product in the marketplace, I never went the next step and actually concluded that audit systems like certified organic automatically and unproblematically equated with a sustainable and healthy diet. There is, in my mind, no doubt that some people do derive some benefit from removing pesticide residues from their diet, much in the same way that there will be people in this room who would also very much hope that there aren't traces of particular nuts or peppers in their lunch today. But avoiding pesticides is not the same as having a healthy diet. That organic butter is still a fat-saturated dairy product, organic wine is still an alcoholic beverage, organic chocolate still contains large amounts of sugar, and that organic crown rack of lamb will be absolutely delicious, but you'll still be looking at it beforehand in the kitchen, wondering how much fat you should trim off it. And the restaurant in the US, which built its brand around providing a certified organic Big Mac, really needs to have a good look at itself in the mirror. In sum, pathway 1 is both very important for our food export industries. We are now exporting well over $3 billion in certified, environmentally ordered exports in kiwi fruit and wine alone. Yet it's also a slightly perilous path, full of imperfect information and potential misalignments. So the second path, linking diet and nutrition to sustainable environments via farmed environments and ending up somewhere near our public health. If farming in New Zealand is currently having a tricky relationship with its environment, particularly in relation to freshwater ecosystems, this at least is a problem with extensive historical precedents. New Zealand farming has always been unkind to the environment, certainly the colonial kind. New Zealand was founded as the first British colony with the explicit role of producing British-style food to feed the newly expanding industrial cities of Britain. Farms were our key agent of colonisation, or so a soon-to-be-released book by an author too modest to mention himself will argue. The reason why our forest cover reduced by 8 million hectares in the 60 years after 1840 is also the reason why New Zealand is the world champion wetland drainer in the history of humankind, having eradicated over 93% of the wetland areas that existed in 1840. And it's because we replaced those indigenous ecosystems with farms to feed British citizens on the other side of the world. Compounding this vexed farm-to-environment relationship in our history, we are also the most export-oriented food-producing country in the world, exporting over 90% of what we produce, easily eclipsing our nearest rival, the Netherlands, who can only dedicate around 75% of their food production for dispatch over the nearest border. And maybe they'll be needing a change of strategy for some of that ham and Heineken after January the 31st. Our food products travel around the world, and this makes food to farm to environment linkages very tenuous. Put simply, the British consumer buying a New Zealand leg of lamb in Sainsbury's in London is remarkably distanced from a farmed environment on the other side of the world. The greatest irony in the history of world trade was New Zealand's agricultural products adopting a clean and green branding strategy from the 1990s. A claim that could only be considered remotely true if you ignore both the entire history of Pākehā farming in New Zealand while simultaneously blinding yourself to the likely ecological destinations of some of our most important farming industries that are slowly and surely priming Morgan Williams's ecological time bomb. The reason we get away with this kind of thing is that our consumers are so far away. And historically, New Zealand citizens had an enormously complacent attitude to our farmed environments. It's ironic that one of the main drivers of environmental change in the Bay of Plenty since the 1990s, particularly those areas dominated by kiwi fruit orchards, was the main driver was the purchasing preferences of a small segment of health and sustainability conscious consumers in Japan and Britain and the US demanding organic and spray-free kiwi fruit. But by any reckoning, this is a very tenuous link between dietary practices in one part of the world and the sustainability of farmed environments in another. I'll head towards the destination of this talk by venturing into the crisis that is inexorably going to eradicate this level of public complacency about the consequences of compromised farmed environments. Let me explain how a second pathway is now opening up with dramatic effects on the map linking diet to public health in farmed environments in ways that are going to make many New Zealanders very unhappy. Right at the centre of a sustainable diet, no matter how you define it, lies our ability as citizens and consumers to access clean and safe drinking water. This innocuous everyday item that we ingest will soon be at the heart of a looming public health crisis due to the slowly accumulating effects of farming activities on the catchments that supply drinking water. The Havelock water crisis in 2016 was the first major moment when this new connection between compromised drinking water and farmed environments began to loom into the public consciousness. Now we are in the opening stanza of a much more compelling crisis of nutrition, sustainability and public health, the viability of freshwater supplies across Canterbury due to the establishment of massive irrigation schemes, and the diversion of deep aquifers into irrigating dairy pastures. Deep under the Canterbury Plains, a slow tsunami of nitrate-contaminated groundwater is inching towards the region's water supply, while a number of shallow bores are already requiring testing for nitrate and E. coli contamination. Like most farm environmental crises in New Zealand, this story has long roots, and it represents, at its simplest, a massive failure of local government to reconcile the interests of farm profitability with the future health of the public. Newspaper accounts juxtapose an increasingly angry public wondering how councils have been asleep at the wheel while a public health crisis has been edging towards them, while other journalists tell of the looming crisis of viability of dairy systems the moment a nitrogen cap is introduced. This is the moment in which public health, safe diet, unsustainable food systems and farmed environments are suddenly, dramatically and inescapably arriving on the same map. We are only just starting to realise the extent of the challenge we are facing. In that 2017 New Zealand Geographic article, the passage that struck me with particular force was this one. It was about the load to come. In short, much of the nitrogen in groundwater that is slowly arriving nearer the coast and its citizens entered the ground about half a century ago. All the rest is still to arrive. To use the parallel term from climate science, it's already baked in. So how, as researchers and policymakers, might we respond to this vexing crisis looming in the relationship between the intensification of farming systems and the public health of citizens? First, from the nutrition and public health side, this is intimidating terrain. I welcome any one of the nutritional experts in the room or elsewhere across New Zealand to join this discussion. We urgently need your input. The comments section of Rural News and Stuff are already filling with folks arguing that the WHO is wrong and that nitrates in drinking water aren't harmful to human health and that blue babies are stricken by other dark forces. So yes, the online army is already rushing to the defence of the nitrate-producing farmers of Canterbury. I'm not competent to evaluate those claims, but there will be people in this room who are. But are you prepared for the deep dive that awaits you when trying to establish frameworks of cost and liability for a contamination problem that began to be loaded into groundwater half a century ago? Or the ethics of who is going to bear the cost of restoring safe water supplies? At least you can't do worse than the Republican politicians in Michigan, who told the poor citizens of Flint that they should respond to a poisoned public water supply by shifting permanently to the consumption of bottled water. Given their penchant for protesting bottled water plants, I can't imagine the citizens of Canterbury thinking that such a shift is even remotely okay, should anything arrive in their drinking water at some point in the future. More likely they'll be gathering the pitchforks and flaming torches and heading for the nearest rotary milking shed. The other side of the map, the one I'm more familiar with, looking towards this emerging crisis from the perspective of someone who studies farming systems and their influence on surrounding environments, this seems to me to be the culmination of processes that, as scholars, we long predicted, yet entirely lack the kinds of disciplinary knowledge needed to grasp the full implications of what's starting to happen. Getting nutritionally compromised by cheap industrial foods produced by nasty industrial farming systems is something we've grown accustomed to. We've become wearily used to the nutrition transition, the obesity epidemic, the long dietary slog against a world founded on the cheap availability of soybeans, wheat, corn, oilseeds, low-grade beef, pork and chicken, and above all, sugar. But while we are familiar with compromised foods from intensive farming, we are much less familiar with the consequences of compromised farm environments and their public health implications. We don't know about blue babies or E. coli contamination or the implications of nitrates for human health. We need to urgently start finding new friends in new disciplines. These are startling times for New Zealand, but potential threats to public health due to unsustainable management of farmed environments are only going to become more common, and public perceptions of a crisis will build quickly, while we might take a long time to assemble a comprehensive account of what is happening. Dr. Morgan Williams should have been awarded the Nobel Prize for Futurology in 2004, because here we are, 15 years later, and somewhere deep under the Canterbury Plains, Morgan's ticking time bomb is starting to explode. Thank you very much.